Everybody's quiet, so I assume. Okay. Let me go back here. Sorry about that, everybody. Where is submissions? There. Whip. There we go. Now, one thing, I would love to have a look at your submissions. I'm just looking at the list here, and I don't know if that is the complete class list. So if you don't have anything for me to look at, I can't give you any feedback. All right, so it wasn't mandatory that you hand anything in, but you did have a whole week off. So I would expect you'd have some progress. So if you don't hand in anything for me to look at, then I can't give you any feedback today. And then you're just handing it in on Friday and hoping everything will be well. Is that clear? Okay. So that means if you have something, hand it in now, okay? Like RFN, okay?
I think mine is missing from the list again.
Ah, could it be that it's a MP something?
I think I submitted it as a RV file.
Oh, I don't know if you can submit as an RV file and have it open up. Let's see. That's just a reference. How about ABI?
I can double check to see if I did put it in the right folder.
Yep.
Pretty sure I did. But...
Make sure. And if you can, convert it to an MOV or an MP4, right? H.264. Okay.
Yeah, it's in here with the 3 different perspectives in a MOV file.
Okay.
For the front quarter set.
It's not showing up in the list here, or is it just not named?
I don't. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I forgot to put my name on it.
There we go. Oh, it's okay. As long as we know the files are there.
Yeah. Just never mind. Crisis averted.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Let's have a look here. Okay. Chenihua. Okay, so first thing, Chenny, oh, hang on. Chen, you, where are we? Come on. Is there any difference between this one and this one?
It's the same.
Okay, now I just see the number 2. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right one. So the first thing is this should be stepped mode. So one thing to fix for submission is make sure that that is stepped mode. Do you know what that means?
Yeah, I forgot it.
So just grab the whole character head to toe and then hit S on frame 1, 4, 7, 10, right? Basically every 3 frames, wherever you found your key poses, okay?
Yeah.
Make sure it's in step mode. And then let's go back to the side view. Okay. One thing I'm noticing is the hips, right? So this is a very graceful walk. There's not a lot of up and down, right? So it's quite level, okay? But what I would suggest you try to do is have a look at the twist and tilt. The other thing that makes this a struggle is, sadly, you're wearing or whoever this is wearing very dark clothing. So black top, black pants, there's no reference. There's no sense of depth, right? It's basically just a wall of pixels, right? With no information about twist and tilt. But remember the hip twists and tilts, and especially when you look in the side view, right? In the side view, I don't see the arm socket moving this way. That means there's no chest tilt. I also don't see the hip socket tilting this way. I don't see the back of the hip, and I don't see the front of the hip. So you've got to make sure you put those in. That happens, right? Every time you take a step, your hip is going to swivel. So if you look from a top view, as soon as you take a step in this direction, your hip will turn away from that leg. Whatever leg goes forward, you turn away from, okay? And with your arms, the same thing. Whichever arm swings, your chest will rotate away from that one, okay? So make sure that you have that in there. That'll help quite a bit. When you look at the way the feet are hitting, there's a little bit of sliding. I can see the corner, right? So if you look at right where that point is, it slips back. So make sure you're using the right control. Sometimes when you work with the ankle, if you're using the pivot here, what happens is when you rotate the foot will rotate back. But if you use a pivot point here, a heel roll, right, then you know that this can rotate the foot up or down and the heel will stay in place. So make sure when you're doing the contact, make sure you're using the heel pivot. Okay? Yeah, That'll make that a lot easier to clean up. Otherwise, every step you have to fix.
Yeah, but I have a question. If I roll the chest and the hip, maybe it will not look like my reference.
Oh, but you did. I swear you did. Because otherwise I would insist that you stand up and show me how you moved your arms and your legs without rotating your hips.
Oh,
It's just not possible. Just trust me, right? Because if I stand up like this and I keep my hips level, I can just do this. Right? Right? So I can barely
Yeah.
move. As soon as I turn, they twist, right? Every time you take a step, there's just no other way. Otherwise, you can barely move your leg. You can't go out very far. So you rotated your hips and your arms, even if it was very subtle.
Okay.
Trust me, you did. It's very hard to not do it, right? You'd have to physically work beyond every fiber of your neurological system to stop yourself from doing it. So trust me, you did. Even though it may not be very much, it's there. And when you see it on a rig, it makes the rig look dead, right? It looks lifeless. It looks like an action figure. So we're just missing out on flexibility. Okay?
Okay.
And the other thing I would look at is, and again, even if it's very subtle, you will see changes in the angle of your face. Pay particular attention to, oops, right over here. Look at the angle, right, of your mask, right? Look at the angle coming to your nose and down and see if that shape tilts at all. If you see that shape tilting, that means your head is moving, that something is changing. If it stays the same, right, it would be really hard to keep it like level unless you weren't going up and down. The moment you have a bounce, there will be some indication of that. So pay very close attention to it. It'll be extremely subtle, but it'll be there. And that will tell you, right, when you have secondary movement, right? So what my guess is that usually when the hip pushes up, you're gonna have this go down, right? And when you go down, you're gonna have it tilt up. So that would be a really loose example, but if it's more subtle, it'll be there, but it'll just be dialed down very subtly. Because if you don't do anything, then the character just glides and then it feels really weightless. Okay?
Yeah.
And that will help. Trust me.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other than that, all the positions seem to be there. The other thing to think about is just the shape of the spine, right? And again, you're walking quite tall. What you can always do here is think about the posing of this area here. When we look at the spine, right? If someone is standing straight, it doesn't mean they're standing with a straight back like this, right? So it doesn't mean that you're literally completely parallel to the vertical. What that usually means is your chest is tilted back, right? And your hip is tilted forward. And that gives sort of really nice posture, right? That means you go to yoga every day and you really care about that stuff, okay? So that's what you want to think about. It doesn't mean that you have, again, the default rig pose, which is going to be probably something like this, which again feels very stiff, very inorganic, right? Not very flexible. So look at the angle of this and see, well, maybe I can tilt the chest back, right? So I have that angle here and I can tilt the chest forward, and that will start to feel a little bit more interesting than just a regular straight. This is straight and this is straight. Okay?
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And Flora, I need you to keep an eye on me. I'm going to yammer and yammer. If I go over 3 minutes, you just let me know, okay?
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, next up, Donkey. So another one, step mode. Remember step mode for blocking? It's looking pretty nice though. You're almost done. Are you there, Donkey? Can you hear me?
He's here, but I think he's having
okay.
issues with the
Yeah.
microphone.
So it's looking good. I think what I noticed mostly in the side view is a couple of areas where there's like some pops and clicks. So particularly the knees. So that's where I spent some time cleaning up. So if you look here, pay attention to this knee. It snaps here, click, and then it goes forward, and then it goes here. Watch out for the formula, right? So when you're putting that foot down, right, that's your contact pose. Both feet are on the ground. When you get to the down position, both feet need to be on the ground. They both need to be moving back. So right here, it feels like the back foot is lifting up. It doesn't feel like it's at the same height as this. It doesn't feel like it's on the same ground plane. So just make sure, if you take this leg, the leg that is behind, and you can see the biggest change that happens is the thigh goes forward. That makes it feel like there's no weight, right? If you don't believe me, just try this trick, right? You just stand here with your leg back and you get someone to kick your knee, right? And all of a sudden you realize, oh yeah, that doesn't feel like I have any weight there. So that's what it looks like. It looks like there's no weight there. So try to keep this leg straighter if you can, right? If you can lean back, tilt up on the toe even more, but keep that knee, keep the thigh moving back. And that's the transition from contact to down. Okay. Now with your reference, if we look at frames, you can see that you have your contact is kind of a bit slow. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I also can see that you shot this at 30 and then had to downsample to 24 because I can see a pop in your video reference every few frames. One pop right there. It says pop, 2, 3, 4, pop, 2, 3, 4, pop, 2, 3, 4, pop. So that's a 3-2 pull down. When you have to go from 30 to 24, you'll notice these artifacts in the spacing. So keep that in mind because it means that if you follow the blocking too closely or the frame by frame too closely, you're missing out on the bigger picture. So you have to remember that when you downsample from 30 frames per second to 24, it will drop frames, which will create spacing artifacts, okay? So you may have to go a little bit off of your reference. It'll look fine when you play it in real time, but if you just frame by frame it, you'll notice these little inconsistencies. But what I'm looking at, the side view, the biggest thing is the knee pops. Everything else is looking really good. You get some nice overlap, right? It's got some nice texture to it. I like the side view as well. Just be careful that you don't go too far off to the side. And what I might try doing is if you look at this, the hip goes this way, right? And then I think what might be kind of fun is if you let the upper body maybe lead this way. So it feels a bit more like the upper body is kind of dragging the hip, right? So you could play around with it and see if they're timed exactly the same, they'll feel a bit stiff. But if it feels kind of like push, pull, you could maybe have the upper body lead a little bit. So it could be timed a little bit earlier. So it feels like it's the action of that twist happening that pulls the hip over to that side. Okay? Just a little bit of offset. Nice work. It's got some nice personality to it. Does that make sense? I'm just gonna check the chat and see. Yes, good, thank you. Okay, Jessica, I see, yep, one submission, front, side. Do you have your reference, Jessica?
I haven't done the yet, the sketches yet.
Oh, okay, yeah, get the sketches in there, but I think what I mean is when you do your play blast, what would be really good is if we can see your reference here.
Oh, okay.
Put the reference here, picture in picture, and if you can, make it just as big as your animation. Just, it depends on how much room you've got, depending on the reference that you shot, okay?
Got it.
The other thing I would do here, this is a very difficult kind of walk to do on a treadmill. I would probably have the character move through space because to get the treadmill to work, the problem is the treadmill has to change speed all the time because you have like a quick movement and a slow movement. So what I would suggest is try to have the character stay here, plant the foot, right? And keep the foot there. Don't have the foot go back. Keep the foot right here and move the hip forward. So physically actually walk the character through your environment. Okay, and it's really easy to do because all you have to do is to fix this, you grab the hip and then the two IK feet, and you just drag the whole pose so that it matches up, so that this foot matches where this one was, right? So you just need that and you just go, okay, I'll slide the whole thing over. So now the foot matches there and I can bring the hip here and then you'll be able to follow your reference even more closely because your reference will have somebody walking through space as well. All right.
Yeah.
I think that'll be a lot easier than trying to do a sneak on the spot on a treadmill because you're going to have this issue with the hip rolling back and forth. Okay.
Yeah.
When you get to blocking this, what you need to also pay attention to with a sneak is usually with a sneak, there's a lot of drag, right? As the body kind of goes back and forth. So when you're looking at your breakdowns, right, you look at what happens here, you get to this point, right? Check your reference and see how far back is somebody leaning. If their foot is way out in front like this, right? They're leaning like this. We got this foot here. How far back do we go, and see how much you can push that. And then when we move forward, what usually happens in the breakdowns is that the hip will lead, right? So the hip will start to rotate from here, right, where it's at an angle like this, it starts to rotate like that. So if that's the main direction, then drag would be the other way. So you would try to lean this part back a little bit more. All right, and it doesn't need to be this extreme, but the idea is that you would feel that the spine is compressing here, right? So it's changing like this because that's where you're applying force. And that means that the extremities that are further away will drag behind, and then they'll catch up, right? And then the same thing when you go from here, right? And the hip is pointing up, then you're gonna go like this and say, well, now the hip is sort of starting to tilt more vertical. Then I would do the opposite and say, okay, now I'm gonna drag this way. Okay, so that you get a little bit more offset. So that's when you start getting into more detail with splining. It's hard to put that level of detail in the blocking, but for the sneak, it really does have a lot more of a wave action in going through the spine, okay? So really pay attention to your reference and see when does somebody when does their head tilt up, right? When they're leaning back and leaning forward. And that'll be a good cue as to what you need to do with the body, okay? Otherwise it can feel very stiff. Right now, the chest feels like it's one piece, and it doesn't change. It just moves back and forth. So what we want to do is we want to try and get that idea of a little bit of separation, so it feels more flexible. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Where's your front view? Front view, watch out for the feet. The feet are sliding this way and that way, so just lock them down. My suggestion is probably for that reach, try to put the foot a little bit in front of the character. So it's like walking on a tightrope, a very thin line, okay? With this rig, one thing I don't like about the design here is the shoulders seem like they're always up and there's a lot of tension. So what I would try to do is see if there's a way you can flatten out the shoulders during some parts of the cycle. You may notice that your reference, maybe somebody has their shoulders up, it might be really high, right? But also look and see, when do the arms bounce? Do you get some change? Because if this line never changes shape, again, it just feels like we're glued, right? So it feels like very mechanical and you don't get any idea that there's any flexing. And what you might see is there's a little pattern where it's like I go up when the arms are up and down when the arms are down. And then it starts to feel a lot more connected, okay? With this rig in particular, just the design, right? I'm not a fan of this. This doesn't feel like anatomically very, very appealing. It's a real flat line. So see what you can do. This is just how the rig is made. We got to see what we can do to make it feel a little more appealing. All right? Okay. And 3/4 view. Yeah, good. Okay. Where are we? G1. Let me go to side view. There's a few things in the, where are we? Number 2, I assume?
Yeah, actually
Yeah.
they're saying, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll just look at number 2. Good. I like that you're putting some secondary movement in the arms and stuff and the head. That's great to see.
Well, actually, I didn't know I have to I work on the 2D drawing thing, but I didn't know I have to put on the drawing video.
Oh, I don't have to see the drawings. The drawings, like what I need to see in the Play Blast, what makes it really easy for me and for Floor to grade is when we can see your animation and your reference, but we don't need to see the draw overs.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
you hand those in, hand in the flash file. We need to see proof that you actually looked at your keys and found them, but we want to make sure we can see your reference without the drawings all over it, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I hope that's clear to everybody, right? So when you hand in your Play Blast, I want to see the animation, check, and I want to also see the reference, check. Okay, so that's good. No need to put the drawings in. Now looking at the reference here. So look at that contact pose. That's looking pretty good. The one thing I see in the reference, again, this depends a lot on the angle, but if you look at the hips, right, you can see the front of the hip. So you could get a bit more twist. So that would mean the hip would turn a little bit more towards us. Okay?
Yeah.
And then if you look here, the other issue is in the reference, it looks like you take a bigger step to the side here. So if you look at the distance from here to here, you really crossed over the line, okay? But when you look at this one, they're almost right in front of one another. So you could go look at your reference and just make that correction. But what that would mean is if I just move the foot over, what I'm seeing is probably a lot more twist on your hip than you meant to, right? If you wanted to mirror that pose. So you have to kind of unwind this, but you can see here the hip, it's basically a back view. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the twist. So you could probably get away with a little more twist on your posing if you want.
Okay. Oh, and I have a question. So on my reference, like right step and left step are different. So do I should go to
Yeah, I would
between?
pick one, either pick one that you like and then mirror it. That's the easiest thing to do is pick one and mirror it, and that'll work. And then just double check again. Sometimes you're looking at reference for the pose, and sometimes you're looking at reference for the timing. So one step you might like, oh, I like 8 frames, but I hate the way I did that step. So you might borrow a bit of both and say, yeah, I'll sort of compromise and I'll do something in the middle.
Okay.
When you look at sort of what's going on, the biggest thing that I see on your spine is your head tilting, right? So what's really nice, that gives you some counter movement. So that means when you get to the low point, so this is the down, and then this is the up here, right? So that's something to really get in there. So what you can do is you can look at the hip, you can grab the translate Y of the hip, which is the up and down, and copy that into the rotate X of the head. And then you would just have to flip it. So the timing would already be there. So you can see in your reference, you see that you hit that extreme, right? And then it's the same thing. When you get to the high point here, that's when you're looking lowest, right? With your head, right? Your nose is pointed down. So this might work really good. And even if it's not perfect, it would get you an incredible start really quickly. You just get the up and down of the hips, paste it into the up and down of the head, and you'll have to scale it way up because remember with the translate numbers, they're usually small, right? 0.8, 0.2, right? Really small numbers. But if you did that as a rotation, you'd barely notice anything like a 0.8 or a 0.2, it's just barely noticeable. So you're gonna have to multiply it, scale up that rotation by a lot to see any significant change. And then you'll probably have to multiply it by times equals -1 to flip it so that it'll do the opposite. You might get lucky. Maybe a negative rotation gives you like, or negative drop gives you a negative rotation that way. I don't know, but most of the time you have to flip them. Okay, but that's what I really see. There's a big thing happening there. The other thing you can look at is your arms, right? So I know the elbow to the hand is the most distracting. It does the most movement, but try to focus on the shoulder to the elbow because that's driving everything. Yeah. And see, where do I see those keys? Look at the straightest line and say, okay, that's my maximum. And it also seems that, yeah, okay, that means that that pose also coincides with just after the down. So this is when you did the down position, right? So you're just about to lift off. So it's just a little bit after the down position. That last moment you're on the ground is when the arms are straightest. And you can see that even here, the wrist is completely straight. And then when you look up, then you'd say, okay, where do I see the biggest bend, right? And you can see that it's probably about here. So it's the push off. Right when you get the push off is when you have this. So you look at like, when is the extreme rotation here? Okay, so you get that working first. So it's kind of bounce, right? And they really bounce up because what's happening is you're hitting the body, right? And I think you also have the same thing. It looks like you shot this at 30. There, pop, pop, 2, 3, 4, pop, 2, 3, 4, pop, 2, 3, 4, pop. So some of the spacing is because of the 30 to 24 conversion, all right? So just keep that in mind, but at least we've got the extremes, and then you have to just go in and watch the spacing, find out where you get those extremes, right? And you can see how much you can even delay that. If you look at this step, look at how many frames after you hit that straight arm, right? You hit that straight arm, but then 1, 2, almost 2 frames, you could probably do 3, where the wrist overlaps, right? So that gives you some nice stuff to work with to try and get this to feel like it's just bouncing, okay? A big, huge bounce, lots of height, right? I think you could definitely caricature that with Norman. When I look at how much up and down is happening with your stomp, you could easily add a lot more to Norman, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, Brett, there's like 10 minutes left before 2.
10 minutes left before what?
2.
Okay, thank you. Julieta, how you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Cool. Let me just move this off to the side there. Nice. Wow, you even did this barefoot. Wow. That's commitment to accuracy there. I'm really, really impressed. Yeah, okay, cool. There we go. So the only thing I would do here that's a little different is I can see you're on the ball of the foot here. The heel's pretty low, but I would try to avoid having it be completely flat just because you've got this really straight knee and I'm just worried you're gonna get knee pops. So if you could, I would try to lift the heel up a little bit and just try to get a little bit of a bend in there just so you know the knee exists and it's not just a straight line, just to help you later.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and there's a lot of twist. You can really feel the twist happening. I'm so happy that you're wearing a belt that actually has stuff on it that I can track, right? So it really, like you see the change, right? I mean, you could literally draw an ellipse, right? And be like, okay, I understand the volume. And then when I go here, I completely get it, right? This helps your brain wrap itself around stuff like this, right? So you're like, there we go, there's the tilt. I can really understand that's how big an angle change I'm going through, right? And then you look at the upper body, the same thing. If you look at what you're wearing, right? So there's this nice white piece coming across the collar, right? Perfect reference. It gives you a really nice line. You know, this is usually what we have to do to people is we tape, you put like bright white reflective tape on people to go get markers, just like mocap, just so you can figure out what's going on. So here you can see again, look at how much the chest is turned away. So really big arm swing, nice tilt on the chest. So I think you could probably do a little bit more. The issue is with the rig is what I'm concerned about is like he has very, very tiny little tubes for arms. And I don't know if you'll have the same range, but I would really try and exaggerate that a little bit just to get that nice big swing. I would try to get the shoulder to really feel like it's moving around, especially at the back position. So when you're over here, it'd be nice if you could move the shoulder so you could twist the chest a little more. So if you look at the reference, you can see there's your cross section, right? You can see there's the halfway point, but this feels a little bit more like it's favoring the side view. Versus here, if you look at that as a plane, it's very clearly a 3/4 view. So you could twist the chest back a little bit more.
Okay.
Okay, so I would put the shoulder back a little more, try to exaggerate that. And that'll help the other side too, because then that arm will be out in front a little bit more. Okay. You have a little bit of a head tilt as well. So that's kind of neat. I would love to put that into the front view to kind of see how that's working. Go, yeah, good. Back and forth.
Yeah, I also noticed that my feet are sliding.
Yeah, that's an easy fix, right? So just go in the graph editor and it's probably the translate X most of the time. And
Yes,
it's just got to be a straight line so nothing changes, just that's an easy thing to fix. Okay. Yeah, getting good tilt. That's good. There. Yeah, I think here you could try to push the feet. I know this is a challenging character, but if you look at sort of, you know, what happens when people walk is there's a real tendency for the legs to go in towards the center line, right? So you could try to do that here. It's just, I know he's got these really big paw feet at the end, so it makes it a little bit challenging because they could intersect, but I would try and see what happens if you move it over a little bit more. So when you take that step, it feels more balanced. When I look at this, right? Look at where your leg is, right? And just drop a line from your chin. 9 times out of 10, you're right in the ballpark. It's exactly same thing in life drawing. If you don't know where the weight is, just drop a line from the chin. And a lot of the times it'll line up and that gives you where you're supported. But here, if you do the same thing, right? It just feels like there's a lot of stuff here that's not over that support, right? So it feels like if I just move this over, it would feel more balanced.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, great reference. Nice work.
Thank you. Just a quick question for the tail. Like, is the tail all right like that? I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, the tail, I think less is definitely more, right? So I would try, I think just keep it in a pose. And what I might do is maybe try not to change the shape too much. Like this change from here to here, this feels
Okay.
like it's waving like this. So try and
Okay.
treat it a little bit more like if you were to look at like a cat's tail, you basically have this shape, right? So
Mhm.
what I would start with is keep it in that shape, right? So it's gonna feel very rigid. And then start with, okay, I have the tail, so just imagine it's like my pen, right? And it's gonna wag back and forth with my hip, right?
Okay.
So as I move back and forth, it's gonna move, right? So you figure out that first. And then what you have is then you have the up and down, right? So that would create a little bit of bounce. And then what you would look at is, well, when my tail, right, when I'm going up, it would go down. So maybe this would be a good position. So it would rotate this way. So you'd look at, if I was to start from here and just do a rotation like that, that would relate to going up and down, boing, 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 right?
Okay.
You do that. And then from the top view, if you were to look, you would look at like, okay, the hip is going back and forth. It would kind of do almost the same thing, but be a little delayed. But start with just this joint and get it working. And then all you need
Okay.
to do is just add a little bit of flexing on the shape of the tail throughout, but very subtle. If you start doing something like this, it's going to feel like a flag in the wind, right? So it's going to feel very active. If an animal's running, if you look at like a lion running, you would see something like that. But if it's just walking, it would probably just be, you know, just kind of hanging down like this, and it would do exactly what I was saying, right? Just a little bit of movement. Okay.
Okay.
The tail's not critical. Just try to not make it look silly. Like, I'm glad you tried to pose it. Sometimes people leave it just straight out like this. It just looks really weird. So don't do that, but just make sure that, you know, focus on the character. That's the most important thing. And then if you get the time, try to make the tail look nice.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I think right now this is just too distracting. Click, click. Keep it in one shape. Okay. Nicholas. How you doing, Nicholas?
Dandy.
Dandy, very nice. I think the hip could have a bit more up and down when I look at your reference, right? It's definitely, there's weight there. And I like that you've got like your head is really loose, right? So that's a nice thing to get in there. So again, when you get to splining this, I would look and see, when does my head hit its maximum? And it looks like it might be the same, right? So that it tilts up the most right here at the down position. So you could borrow the up and down of the hip and copy that into the, you know, rotate here when you finally clean it up, and to see how that works. Yeah, looking nice. Cool, yeah, not too much to say. Looking good. Let's have a look at the front view. Nice. Were these filmed at exactly the same time? Did you have two cameras going, or this is just, you had to redo it and kind of?
I'm just super accurate.
Very nice. I was going to say, it looked really good. Bravo. Yeah. This is exactly what a director would tell an actress. Do the same thing. Exactly the same.
It took 90 tries.
Good. Glad you had to suffer a little. I don't want people think it's just easy. Yeah, so I think when I look at the side view, you don't get as clear an idea how far your arms are going out to the side. So this is nice reference. The other thing just to pay attention to is in the side view, you're walking not exactly perspective straight, right? You're not lining up with like the perspective lines. You're walking a little bit diagonally. So just take that into account when you're blocking, right? That you're not moving exactly completely straight, and that's okay. That's real life for you. But there's a lot of stuff going on with the wrist. So some of that I might edit out because it's going to be very noisy. So if you look at your wrist, right? Look at the angle of it. Your wrist is facing, basically you can look at like this, and then it tilts all the way this way, right? So it's like we're looking at a cube, and then it tilts all the way to the side. So there's a big rotation there, and then you come forward, and then it twists right back up. And this would all be, you know, all this is happening in the arm because you've got two bones in here, right? The radius and the ulna. The problem with the rig is if you try doing that from the elbow, it's going to break the elbow. So you'd have to try and do that all with the wrist control. And that can sometimes lead to some gimbal lock, right? So the wrist will start doing helicopter things in betweens. So what you want to look at is if you're going to move the wrist a lot, whatever that direction is, right? If that's rotate Y, then you want to make sure change the rotate order so that that is the most important. So you would either have X, Z, Y, or Z, X, Y, but Y is usually the one that has to be the top order for it to behave properly. Okay, that's if you're going to go
I
that.
definitely tried to do that.
See what you can do. Yeah.
I was like, yeah, my rig doesn't really have any twist in the wrist.
Mhm.
So I tried my best to like get the shape in, but I don't know that I can do more than what it is right now.
Right here, you can see just by looking at the shirt, right? You look at that big rotation. So if you look at this line right here, that tells you when you're rotating here from the humerus, right? From the shoulder down to the elbow, you get that big rotation. So that's where you'd understand that what I'm seeing on the wrist is actually coming from here. So in that case, I may not go for the wrist. I might try and put it in here and then come forward. So you'd say, okay, that's when I would rotate forward. So now I can see the arm is rotated all the way this way. So I would go here and see if you could rotate that up from this position, not from here and not from the wrist. Okay. So the tricky part is because the lower arm is moving the most, your eye's going to be distracted by it. So try and pay attention from the line here to here and see if you can get that working first. Okay. Yeah, very nice. And when you get into sort of splining and cleaning this up, what you might look at is look at when your head tilts this way. My guess is it's not going to line up perfectly with anything, and that's good because then you'll have an idea like what happens. So what you might discover is the hip is actually still going up and I'm still turning this way. So there's a little bit of an overlap because when you just block these in, they'll tend to line up on the same frame and it'll look a little mechanical. It'll feel like everything's moving at the same time. So what you can do is once you've got the hip done and you're feeling that that's working really good, then go down the chain and look for offsets and say, okay, well, if I wanted to, I could just grab everything in the head and neck and I'll just drag it one frame later. So you just kind of cycle your curves just one frame later and see how that feels. You're like, I like that. Let's grab the whole chest, grab the whole trunk and one frame over and look at it and say, okay, that's good. But now the whole upper trunk is all timed. Okay, what can I do? I'll go grab the neck and the head one frame later just to see. So you just, it's kind of like, you know, mixing music, right? You just sort of, you've got the beat. Now it's just like a little bit of an offset just to see how that feels. Okay. Because when you just go with the keys, they'll all line up together. But you did a really nice job. It's looking really good.
Thank you.
Very fun. Nice reference. Okay. Orlando. Are you there, Orlando?
Yeah, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Nice.
Step mode. Stepped. Make sure you put it in step mode, okay?
Okay.
And more up and down. The hips are very, very weightless right now. So put in a lot more up and down. I can really see it in your reference. Yeah. Yeah, if you just
I'm pretty sure that I did step mode.
Oh, this is what I see. Did you hand in another one?
No, it's the only
Okay.
one, but I'm pretty sure that I did it. But
Maybe the My file is, but you forgot to hit it on the play blast, maybe.
okay.
But one thing that's nice in your reference is that you have basically this brickwork gives you a nice line to look at. You can actually see, right, your head, right? You can sort of say like, okay, that height is for, it's not even the low point, but it gives you a nice marker where you can like, okay, that right there is sort of just coming out of the low point. The low point is actually there. And then where's the high point? You say, that's like right here. So that gives you an idea. That's how much the hip is moving. And if you can't track the hip as easily, you can track the head. Right? And then you look at your animation, right? You can see it's much more subtle. So you could definitely get away with more up and down, right? It's a really big stride, big movement. Okay.
Okay.
And looks like it was a nice sunny day. Lucky you. Is that a hammock?
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah,
hammock?
exactly.
Oh,
Super cool.
I'm very jealous. You must not be in Vancouver. Am I right?
For here, it's so cool. It's Mexico City. Yeah.
Oh, that's so nice. Beautiful.
Yeah.
What's the weather like these days? It must be pretty nice, pretty warm.
Yeah, super sunny.
Yeah. Oh.
Yep.
I can't wait to go back. The VFS sent me to Mexico City a couple of years ago, and I got to go to Tec de Monterrey and Anahuac University and give workshops. That was really fun.
Very nice. Yeah.
Okay. So the other thing I'm looking at here is I know you're taking a big stride, but one thing to watch out for is the back leg It's locking straight, really straight. And that foot is coming off the ground a bit early. What should happen is this foot will lock to the ground, and this one will still be on the ground too, but really high up on the toe, but they keep going back, okay? When I'm looking here, if you look at the amount of bend that's going on, my guess is you could probably lift the hips up a little bit higher on Norman just because he's got these very long spindly legs, and that'll help that feel a little bit better, okay? Because when you're walking, wherever this is walking, you don't get the impression that they're walking very low to the ground. There's a low point, but it doesn't feel like they're crouching low to the ground. But when I look at the poses, the angle you're getting with the legs, it feels a little bit like they're low to the ground, lower than I would expect. Okay?
Okay. Yep, got it.
Yeah, you've got the chest movement working. That's good. Keep the twist in the hip as well. The hip socket doesn't seem to move as much. But if you look at your reference again, you'll see that in this portion, you can really see, right? The hip is angled like this, and the chest you can see is basically like a side view. You can barely see the front of the chest, right? So it's turned away. So you can really see that twist. And then look at the other extreme, and you can see that, oh, wow, look at the hip. It's basically a side view, right? I'm basically looking at the hip into the picture plane, and the chest is turned this way, okay? So the hip's pointing that way, and this is pointing this way. So look at those angles. And again, if you look at the clothing, that'll help the neckline, right? Gives you an idea where the center point is. And then for the belt line, it's a little bit harder to see, but you can really track by how much you see of the front of the hip and then the back of the hip in those two extremes. Okay?
Okay, got it.
Let me just check the front view. What I would do is don't put the reference on top of your animation or behind your animation. Separate the two so we can see the reference over here and then the animation over here. This is okay if you want to work this way and you're trying to match the poses. That's great. But yeah, I would love to see this. This seems like a really nice strong pose. Really get that tilt going on here. Get that arm up and out really big, you know, kind of nice macho walk here, right? So really trying to strut a little bit, get that up to the side, but that nice big tilt on the chest, right? You're getting that side to side movement, you know, back and forth. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
And then also look at the pose of your hands and fingers, right? So they match. So it's not just a default big pose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When come back to Mexico, call me.
Yes, I will, definitely.
To go for amazing tacos.
Oh, so good. God. Yeah, the food is amazing.
Can I join?
Yeah, of course.
We should all go for a virtual field trip, right? We could all make tacos and go look at, you know, Mexico City and drink virtually. Nice and safely.
Exactly.
Hey, Fred, just letting you know that you're at 2 p.m.
I know. I'm getting caught up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sunny days in Mexico. Oh, dear. Okay, so who was this? Someone forgot to put their name on the file. Was that? Who was that?
That was me.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay. Matt. All right. Let's go to the side. Sorry, I just gotta move my stuff out of the way here. So one thing is, again, reference. Let's look at the reference, because again, it's hard to give feedback if I don't see the reference. Just looking at this from a posing point of view, this is really ambitious because the hips have to be so low to the ground. That just makes things really challenging. Now I see the arms are back like that, but the thing I don't see any change in is the torso. So that feels like it's just parallel straight up. So that's what I would want to look at my reference. I'd want to see if that's really how the person is walking. I want to see how low they get to the ground and does it make sense? If somebody's taking a step here, for example, if I see that this leg is out in front more than this one, then I'd get the idea that for counterbalance, right, you'd be back like this and those arms would be out to the side like that. So if they're doing like a classic kind of sneak, so that the more you pivot off of this foot and you extend this one forward, the more the body has to tilt back this way. So it's kind of counter movement. I move this leg out further. I got to balance by leaning back more. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I forgot the reference in the Maya file, but I included it in my submission folder.
Okay. So for final submission for the Play Blast, yeah, put your reference side by side with your animation, please. Okay.
Yep.
That'll make it a lot easier to comment. The other thing, just because this is going to cycle, the other issue is the head, right? So when we start here, it's looking straight at me. And is that what we need in a cycle, right? Because that means we have a huge amount of rotation. It's going to feel like the person's looking side to side every step. So that's when you have to look at is maybe I was performing a bit too much. And what I should do is follow the posing that I have more in the middle, where we're just sort of, maybe they're just scanning a little bit side to side, but they're not doing a big rotation like that. Okay?
Right. Yeah.
Other details to look at is when they're putting their foot down, where's the ground plane? Oh, it is there. Okay. Yeah, just for a second, I felt like it was floating. Double image. Okay, you got a ground plane in there. Good. And the other question I have is, are you animating the arms? Are they in FK? Are you working from here? Because
I was working from the wrists.
I wouldn't do that for a walk. The only reason I would do that in a walk is if I needed to have one hand hold on to the other, or I was holding something that I needed to be able to pin a hand to something. Most of the time for a walk, you want to work from the shoulder just because then it feels more connected. Otherwise, you get kind of a marionette feeling where like the wrist is leading and the elbow feels loose and floppy. Okay?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Those notes make sense?
Yep.
Let's have a quick look at the front view. Yeah, similar notes, more up and down. You can see that there's a high point, one low point, and then it just floats. So just double check your up and down pattern, and that should be symmetric for both steps. Okay, so it should be an up and a down for each step. So each step should have a high point and a low point, and then it should repeat for the next step. Also in the front view, have a look at the angle of the legs. If they come straight down and this leg is off the ground, it feels very off balance and very inorganic. Do like this. Okay, have the feet come down to the center line. All right.
Okay.
Yes. All right. Next, Sarah. That's looking fun. So Sarah as well, reference, make sure you put the reference side by side with your animation. Okay.
Yep.
All right. That's looking okay. One thing is check your spacing. If I look from here to here, that foot should be moving a lot further back. And that would also mean that the thigh, this line, it should keep moving back. So the idea is the leg keeps rolling back all the way. Now this rig, I know he's got these huge canoe feet. So the only worry here is this would go through the floor, right? So you'd be stuck right in the ground. So what you might have to do is lift this up a little bit more. You may have to compromise and kind of move the heel up a little bit. Okay?
Okay, yep.
The other thing is if you look at this pose, this is the right leg. It's quite far forward. And if you look at the next pose, right, it barely moves. So I think you're missing one pose in here. So I see like there's a contact, a down, a passing, but we need the push off.
Okay.
So the push off pose is when this leg is holding all the weight and this one is just about to be dropped onto the ground, right? So we're just about to come and plant it on that point. So just watch that. Okay, I think you're missing one pose in the cycle.
Okay.
Because you really notice the arms. The arms kind of strobe because what happens is from this frame to this frame, it almost feels like that's the same arm, but it's opposite sides of the body. See that? So that creates kind of an optical illusion where it doesn't feel like there's movement. It feels like things teleported, that the arms just all of a sudden on one frame, they switch sides and they stop moving. So when you add that extra pose in there, that'll take care of that. It won't feel like such a strobe. Right. Now from the front view, I think what you're doing is funny, but I think it feels too isolated. It feels like there's only rotation right here from this point there. So it feels very broken, right? So it feels like this is too much is being done with this one rotation point. So I would try to spread that out over more rotations and not have such a strong angular break in the character. Okay? So you can tone this down. You could also try and see if there's other controls in the spine that might help that create the effect you're trying to create. This rig as well, I would put feet more towards the center and check your reference and really see if you look at this, the center line is almost just right at the edge. So the chest is basically almost a side view. So that's a really big rotation, and the hip isn't rotated as much. So that's why I think it maybe you're rotating the chest on its own too far. So check your reference and see if you want to reduce that a little bit, or maybe you need to use a little bit of like the abdomen and the middle spine and then the upper spine to kind of, you know, create that pose that you're seeing in your reference. But right now it just feels like it's just too much. It feels broken. It's very interesting. It's very funny, but it feels like this part of the rig has no flexibility. So it just feels like this cube that's not flexing. Okay, so it just feels a little off. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And there we go. Sasha. You there, Sasha?
Yeah, I resubmitted the one with the reference if you want to get that one after.
Oh, sure. Let me just go grab it. Thank you. Refresh. Did it work? Okay. Where are they? I don't see it. Isn't that showing up? Sasha. Maybe I have to search again. Oh, I don't see it yet. Maybe it's still uploading. Okay.
Oh, it exported as MP4 file. That's
oh, are they in the same folder though?
They are.
Those are MOV. Oh, I see. There you are. Pardon me. Just blind. Don't mind me. Okay. Over here. Cool. So I think looking at the reference, I think you're exaggerating the hip a little bit, which is okay, because in the reference, it's quite flat, right? So to get a little bit more weight, but it might be too much. I get worried when I see the legs getting this bent. So you could play around with that. You could experiment and just lift the low point up a little, okay? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Look in the front view, you can see the feet are sliding a little bit across the floor. So just line them up so that on the ground they're okay. And on the reference, you can see the person's head is kind of going back and forth. That's kind of fun. So if you look at it, they're tilted up a little bit more. So I know with this droid, it's hard to kind of get them to tilt up as much, but what it feels like is it feels like the nose is leading. So it feels more like this than like this, right? So,
okay.
So I think what I would try to do is not have the nose lead, but try and have like the neck and head. So see if you can get the whole head to kind of roll from one side to the other. I know this rig has limitations in that part, but see if you can just get it to feel a bit more like your reference. So it's kind of tilt, and they're looking up a bit more.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if you look at the posing of the arms, right? These are coming out very, very straight. You could turn them. So if you were to look at what's going on, this arm is rotating from the shoulder to the elbow, right? Quite a bit. And then you can see it changes position at the back, but they're very close to the body, but it never feels like a complete straight line. So in the front view, I would just look and see if there's anything you do to change the shape. And the easiest thing to do is you have straight arms, right? So there's very little you might feel like you can shape. So bend the elbow and then have a look and see, well, what can I do now that I have that bend and I tilt them? Now it feels a bit more like those arms. So if you think about what's going on with the reference, the arms are kind of turned this way. So we're walking with like the top of the hand more visible. So they're turned forward rather than being 90 degree like that. Okay, so you could try and layer that in a little bit and you could loosen up the arms just a little bit. In the side view, it's looking okay, but I think the front view, right, really shows the limitations of that posing, right? So we need to do a little bit more in that view to loosen it up. But on the whole, it's looking really nice. Great job.
Thank you.
Okay, what the? There we are. So that was Sasha. Sion, how you doing?
I resubmitted mine too with a reference.
Oh, okay, let's have a look.
But with a different file.
Is it this one?
Yes, and the front one too. Front view, yeah.
That one and that one, okay. There, that's front and side. go. So here, with this, I would treat this as your contact pose. So I wouldn't use this as your contact pose because the foot is actually just not making contact. So that's the frame right there. Okay? And try to get that bend. It feels a little bit, if we kind of draw a little triangle like this, right? Look at the triangle and see, well, it's actually pretty balanced. But here, if I do the same thing, it feels like it's sloped more this way. Okay, so I would bring this foot back a little bit and then tilt up on the ball of the foot here. And then try and get that to feel a bit more balanced. All right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And you're going up and over. Watch out for this little movement so I can see the hip. It actually moves forward. It moves from this spot to this spot. So in the side view, I wouldn't do that. This is probably a translate Z. Don't do any translating because you're building the cycle on the spot. And if you move, the hip moves the whole upper body. So it introduces noise. What you'll usually see if you watch people on a treadmill, you will notice their hip does move, but what you'll see is that the upper body compensates. So that as your hip pushes forward, your rib cage and your spine lean back. So it's like this opposition happens, right? So that you stay in the same place, so even though you're moving. But here, what we do is you move the whole thing, the whole column of the spine gets moved around and it becomes really noisy in the side view. Okay? So just in the side view, just have the hip go up and down. Okay? I think you could probably push the arm swing a little bit. It looks like the arms are doing some odd stuff. I can see in this area, it feels like the arm kind of holds. So if I can almost imagine that's where the arm is here, then the next pose, it stays in the same spot and then it starts to move and then it moves here. And what I would try to do is use the chest a little bit. Maybe that could push the things a little bit more, but I would try to get the arm out of the body silhouette just a little bit more, just so it's a bit clearer. Make sense?
Yes.
Everything else is looking okay. Let's look at the front view. Yeah, so you got a very loose kick, right? So you're kind of kicking out to the side. So that means you're going to have a lot more movement on the hip, right? So the hip, if you look at sort of where you start and how big a change you make in the hip, look at where you're starting from, right? There's a big shift. And when that happens, right, then what you'll notice is the very, very strong line, right? And this comes off to the side like that. So you could try and get that. You'd need just both extremes, okay? So this is really hard stuff to get in there because it's very, very subtle and it's almost like a flappy foot. But look at the way your foot comes down. You just drop that foot, boom, right? Just a couple frames and it just hits the ground really hard, right? So you need to get that in the final blocking, that the foot hits the ground really hard. And look out for some positions here where the hip is the same. I can see you're moving things, but the hip is in the same place. If you look at your reference, it isn't. So what happens here that's a little different is normally, I'll check the side view, is when you hit the low point, right, you kind of go down, right? So you go down to this point, and then here you're shooting up a little bit higher. Boom, boom. So there's a texture where like when you hit the ground with that foot, you kind of bounce up a little bit stronger than going down. So get that in your blocking. Boom, 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 right? So that shows that there's sort of this nice push up. And that's the most important thing to get on the spine. Yeah, great work. Okay?
All right, thanks.
Okay, who have I missed? Say how. Say how, are you there?
Hello.
How are you doing? Let me just find the side view. Do you have your reference as well?
I have, but I forgot to include the playblast.
Make sure to put that in the playblast for final submission. Let's see here. So we've got our contact pose. So here to here, right? So this one, oops. So this is frame one, right? So this would be the first frame. And if we were doing the cycle, then what you would do is you would make sure that, okay, this foot would be here at frame 7. So this is frame 1, this is frame 13, right? If we're doing the usual 12 frames, then the halfway point would be here at 7. And then the other pose, it would be halfway here at 4. Okay, so when you look at this next pose, you can see how the heel barely moves, and then it moves a lot. Okay, so then it moves very far. So you got to watch your spacing there. So this one should be at the 50%. It should be halfway from the front position to the back position. It feels like it's more, okay? So that's when you need to make sure you start with front position and back position, get the halfway position, and then you cut this in half, you know, if that's about 4, and then the same thing, you cut this in half, and that would be about 10. That's if we were walking on the formula, okay? And that'll help. There also feels like there's a different height. If I look at this line and I look at where that foot is, when I look at this one, right, it doesn't quite feel like it's the same ground plane, right? So especially right here, this feels lower, and this feels like this front part would actually be going through the ground. So make sure you put a ground plane. And that way you'll see if any of the geometry starts to intersect, it'll be a little bit easier to see, okay? The other thing when you're looking at the posing here, this foot, right? This is very, very straight. I would see if you could get a little bit of a break, right, in the foot, just to make it feel a little bit more like that. There's weight there, okay? And then when you pull that foot up, right, I can see there's a big change in the rotation on the hip, right? So I would try to avoid having the hip rotate that much, that extreme amount. And it almost feels like the hip is moving up, but the body isn't reacting. So it feels like it's squashing. It feels like it's going up, right? But the upper body is not responding. Okay, so that's going to cause problems with that rotation there. When you lift the foot forward, the leg, you can see that this shape is fairly straight, and so is this one. So it would read better if you did this. So it's very clear which leg is on the ground and which one is in the air. Okay, and then you're missing the push off. So there's a pose here just before we get to the extreme back position where all the weight starts to get transferred and the leg is out in front and we're just about to put it down. Okay? And then here again, we can see something's going on here. Look at the knee. There's some scaling. So watch out. I would avoid using any stretch controls unless you absolutely need them. If you're having trouble getting things to reach here, the thigh is expanding, okay? And you can see that even though the leg seems to be in the same spot, right? This foot is lifting up and this little movement of the foot is kicking the hip up really high, okay? Then you got like one frame where this arm drops over here. This pose, the elbow's busted, right? So the elbow's actually breaking and going that way. That might work when it's moving. So it might work. It might actually make it feel really nice and flexible, kind of like goofy. But as a held pose, that's what makes it feel really odd, right? And especially when you go here. I probably wouldn't do this for the extreme, but for the in-betweens, when you're going this way, I would probably have the arm posed like this. And then when I brought it forward, then I would try and loosen it up because I'd be able to hide that breaking of the joints a little bit more easily. Okay? You also need to get some twist and tilt. The chest is not tilting and the hips aren't tilting as much. I see that there's a little bit of tilt. I can see the front of the hip, but the chest, you can see the arm socket always stays in the same place. When you're forward, the arm socket should be forward, right? And then what would happen is we would see that shoulder blade and you would even see the other shoulder blade over here. You would see that arm over there. So that would tell you that the chest had rotated away from us, okay? And then here I would even push this a bit more and be able to see the side here. And then that leg socket would go back even further, right? Just trying to get more twist in everything. Okay. So a few things missing in the formula. Watch out the rig. The stretching is what I'm concerned about. That is not like a consistent position for the knee. Something's going on there. So try and resolve that. Okay.
Hey, Brett, we're almost at 2:30.
It's 2:30. I think that's the last contestant of submissions so far. So what we'll do is we'll stop the recording here. There we go.